I went into movie theaters and I saw Platoon, and it was instantly just shocking to me because I'd never seen a war movie where I think the realism was evident. When Dale Dye comes on the screen, things get real. It's like everything suddenly becomes more believable. Have you heard that from other people?
To me, that's an Oscar every day. They say, you don't have to say anything, Dye. You come on, you wear the uniform correctly, you've got the right look in your eyes, the right set to your jaw. We say, that guy's real. So it's sort of instantly recognizable. And that's really a compliment. It's quite a compliment.
You did 2 tours in Vietnam, am I right?
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that and your military career that led up to this, because that's what informed your entire process of technical advising and acting. Welcome to Make the Donuts. I'm your host, Erik Sabiston. I'm a best-selling author, a dual-rated airline pilot, and a career counselor. I've helped over 8,000 people make the jump to the airlines. Now, I'm interviewing successful people from a variety of professions around the world. It's time to learn their secrets for success. Make the Donuts starts now. This is going to be my absolute favorite episode of season 1. It's the last episode of season 1, and I am finishing it the right way with a guy who has been a mentor to me, and he's been an icon in Hollywood for decades. If you don't know who he is by his name, when you see him, you're going to know exactly who he is. He's none other than Captain Dale Dye, Marine Corps veteran, Hollywood technical advisor for military stuff, an amazing best-selling writer, and just an all-around great guy. Captain Dye, it is an extreme honor to have you on my show. Thanks for coming on Make the Donuts.
Chevy, it's fun. I guess we're over our technical glitches now. Neither one of us are high profile. You fly helicopters. Come on, man. You should know about this stuff.
You would think. I've got a younger wife, much younger wife, and she looks at me sometimes. You know, when I wrote the book, Dust Off 7-3, which you guys helped me with, I remember I had to buy a computer, and I'm trying to touch the back button, and my young wife is looking at me, and I'm like, is it going to blow up? Because I didn't know what would happen. She's like, God, you're so old.
You look for the self-destruct button is what you do. I get it. But listen, it's great to be here with you, and I guess we're ready to converse.
Yeah, I want to start right in, at the beginning. Let's jump in and tell us, how in the world did you become the military guy in Hollywood?
It was a combination of luck, audacity, and stupidity, I think. When I retired in 1984, after 2 decades of Marine Corps service, I really didn't know what the hell to do with myself. I mean, there were only a couple of options. I could go to some small town and, get a job on the police force, but I'd been shot at too many times to really want to do that. Or, I could become a cubicle rat in some defense industry thing, but I'd be a suicide in about 6 months of that kind of job. So I sat down and said, look, you've always had a creative itch. You've always been the kid around the campfire that could keep everybody interested in some shaggy dog story that doesn't really have a point. So what can you do? What can you bring to the table? What occurred to me was that I'd always been a movie fan. I'd always been seen every military movie there was, I think. And the common denominator was they all pissed me off. They just didn't say who we are, what we are. And I was just convinced that what we really are, who we really are, how we think, what we do, how we converse, our great sense of black humor is much more interesting than anything I was reading or seeing, from Hollywood writers. So I said to myself, look, kid, pack your trash, go to Hollywood, tell these guys where they're wrong, and tell them how you can fix it. Well, I went to Hollywood. I didn't have a lot of luck with that approach. I started hanging around movie lots and sets, and I would get, I would accost the first guy that looked to me like he had some influence, had a tie and a briefcase. I grabbed him and accosted his butt and told him, look, if you're making military movies, you're wrong. Here's why. And you need me. And of course, they would call security and I'd be escorted off the lot. And I just knew that if I had to get to somebody that would understand why my way of making military movies, training the actors, giving them some familiarity with who we are, what we are, and what our life is like, then they could bring a credible performance to the screen. And they wouldn't just be repeating the mistakes they'd seen in the last bad war movie they watched. So I was just about to give up, frankly. People had been telling me I'm nuts anyway. And I was about to believe they were right, that I'm nuts and I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. But a friend of mine who was in the business came to me one day with a copy of Daily Variety, which is a trade paper. And he had circled a little item in a column, a gossip column, Army Archit's column, I think it was. And it said that a heretofore relatively unknown writer-director by the name of Oliver Stone was going to do a movie based on his own experience as a combat infantryman in Vietnam. And I said, oh, Christ, here we go. If I can just get this guy, anybody will get it, he'll get it. Well, through a series of machinations I can't really tell you about because the statute of limitations probably hasn't run out, I managed to get myself into a cutting room where Oliver was editing a film called Salvador, which was his first big screen effort. And I got about 5 minutes with him while he was cutting a movie. And I said, look, you don't know me and I don't know you, but if what I see is what I read is true, you know and I know that the only way to do this is for us who've been there to take our take on it. We've got to train these actors. We've got to make them who we were at 19 and 20 years ago. And Stone had been trying to get his movie called The Platoon at that time made for 10 years or so, and he had no luck. So I think he thought, well, look, let's try this guy's approach. Let's see what we can do. So we sniffed each other's butts for a while like a couple of dogs, and he decided that maybe I had a point. And eventually, 2 days later, he called and he said, okay, let's make a deal. And the deal was all in his favor, believe me. I had no leverage. But he said, I'm going to give you 33 actors in 3 weeks. And I'm going to send you to the Philippines, where you're going to live in the jungle with these guys. And when you bring them down out of there, they better be who we were. They better know how we think, how we talk, how we relate to each other. And if they don't, you're fired. And I said, okay, cards are on the table. I got to go do this. So he gave me 33 actors, including at that time Willem Dafoe, Johnny Depp, Charlie Sheen, Forrest Whitaker, and on and on. These were relatively unknown at that point, but they rapidly became known. So we spent 3 weeks in the jungle. I won't bore you with what went on, but if you've been in the military at all, you know what went on. They dug their own holes and lived in them for 3 weeks. And the upshot was that we did this little, all we had was $5 million. And today that's chump change for any kind of feature film. But we made this movie. Oliver was kind enough to, having seen me raise this unit, to say, all right, you're going to play the company commander. And I had no idea what that was about, but I was willing. And we made the film. We brought it home in 1985. We started showing it around. It got enormous reception from veterans. And lo and behold, it won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for Oliver. And he was kind enough at that point to have me stand at the Academy Awards and say, that's the guy who deserves much of the credit for this film. And at that point, they were no longer throwing me off the lots. They were calling me saying, what can you do for me? So that's what I meant when I said luck played a big role. I got that one lucky break. And since then, We have worked on 112 movies, television shows, themed entertainment projects, video games, and things like that. So I think I've had an opportunity over the past 30, 40 years to shine that long overdue and much deserved light on the people who wear our American military uniform. And if I did that, then mission accomplished.
When I saw it as a young kid, I went into movie theaters and I saw Platoon, and it was instantly just shocking to me because I'd never seen a war movie where I think the realism was evident. And I don't say this lightly. Whenever you walked on the screen, it's like it suddenly got real. And that's a theme. I don't know if you are aware of that, but as a veteran, having served in two different services, when Dale Dye comes on the screen, things get real. It's like everything suddenly becomes more believable. Have you heard that from other people before?
I have, Sabby, and look, thank you. To me, that's an Oscar every day. They say, you don't have to say anything, Dye. You come on, you wear the uniform correctly, you've got the right look in your eyes, the right set to your jaw. We say, that guy's real. I get it. So it's sort of instantly recognizable. And that's really a compliment. It's quite a compliment.
Well, it's true. I mean, you've lived a life. I mean, you were in the Marine Corps when you started out, and you did 2 tours in Vietnam. Am I right?
Yeah.
Now, tell us a little bit about that and your military career that led up to this, because that's what informed your entire process of technical advising and acting.
Well, it did, Savvy. And I started off as an infantryman in 81 Mortars. And I was out at Camp Pendleton, and I got kind of bored. Nobody really knew what Vietnam was at that point. We had a few advisors over there and some helicopters, and that's all anybody worried about. But I became bored with looking at the other guys' pack walking up those hills at Camp Pendleton. And I said, there's got to be some way I can see what the Marine Corps does. If I can just get out and get a feel for it. And I ran across a guy, Corporal Doug Bland, I'll never forget his name, who was wandering around I think we had a firing line for 81 set up. And he's wandering around with a camera hanging around his neck and a notebook, and he's talking to people. And I said, well, what the hell is he doing? I was just interested. So I went over and said, hey, who are you and what are you doing here? And he introduced himself, and he said, look, I'm a Marine Corps combat correspondent. I said, you're a what? And he said, no, that's what I do. He said, it's a great dodge. He said, if you're able to tell a little story, take a picture or two, you could do anything there is to do in the Marine Corps. They'll let you do it. They'll send you out there to do it. And I said, well, wait a minute. How the hell do you get into that? And what it evolved to was that I was taken down and introduced to some officers who looked at me and looked at my record, found out that I had been the editor of my high school newspaper. And they said, maybe you can do this. So they sat me down and they gave me a little test. And it was a piece of cake. I didn't think anything about it. I went back to my outfit. And I said, well, if that works out, it's fine. If it doesn't, fine. And I guess about 2 or 3 months later, I got a call from the first sergeant who said, what the hell is this? I said, what do you mean, first sergeant? He said, you're getting transferred. They're changing your MOS. You're going to go over these stateside. What are you doing? I said, first sergeant, not guilty. I said, yeah, you're guilty. Get the hell out of here. And off I went. They began to train me as a Marine Corps combat correspondent. Promised me I was going to go to school and a number of other things I never did. And what I discovered was that in the Marine Corps in those days, when they said combat correspondent, the emphasis was on the first word, combat. So I immediately got, there's only a handful of these people in the Marine Corps. So I immediately got orders to Vietnam, joined up with the 1st Marine Division, met a bunch of absolute lunatics that were over there doing what I was doing. And the story was that, look, you run to the sound of the guns. You got to be up on the pointy end of the bayonet. If you're not up there, you're not doing the job. So I went at it in that fashion. And I think I did something like 31 major combat operations over 2 tours. And there was just never any rest. There just weren't enough of us to cover all of the things that the Marine Corps was doing. And we weren't doing anything major anyway. I mean, we weren't. We were producing little hometown newspaper stories, essentially. We were sending off stories about, Rudy in the rear rank with a rusty rifle, or PFC Joe Sixpack did this or did that. And I wondered, was it worth it? Because most of us had 3 or 4 Purple Hearts, had been shot up in combat. And I said, is this worth it? And then one day I went to a unit, I think it was 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, a unit that I was familiar with and had covered. And a little Lance Corporal came up to me, and he had this letter. And he said, look. And he showed me, and his mom had seen a little story I wrote that got put in his hometown newspaper. And he was famous in the outfit. And I realized, if I do this right, if I can stay alive and do this right, that long overdue light will get shown on these kids. And that's what I wanted to do. So that's how it all started. I went on through that particular combat mess, got shot up a couple of times, survived the Battle of Hawaii City, which, I still get nightmares about that puppy. That was rough, house to house, and none of us were trained for it. So that was in Tet of 68. So I finished up my time in Vietnam in about 1970, around May of 1970, I think. And went home and tried to decide whether I'm going to stay in this Marine Corps lash up or not. And at that time, we were dying down on our commitment to Vietnam. And the commandant of the Marine Corps was determined to broom all the Vietnam deadwood out, get us back to basics, starting again. And in order to do that, he decided that he needed some senior NCOs. And I was an E-78 at that point. He thought he needed some senior NCOs to be commissioned and then help him broom out the deadwood and get us started off on the right foot after the Vietnam commitment. So he insisted, several people insisted, that I apply for a commission. But I didn't have a college degree. And in those days, you had to have a college degree in order to be commissioned in the Marine Corps. But there was a workaround. You could become a warrant officer. And once you became a warrant officer, if you went along, maybe eventually somewhere around in there, you could get your degree and then convert your commission. So I did that. It was an exciting time to be in the Marine Corps. It was an exciting time to realize that as a leader now, or a more senior leader, I can influence young men and young women. I can train them, I can teach them. And it was at that period where I began to train and to teach and to raise other people's children that I really realized this is worthy. This is worth doing. This gives me a way to contribute not only to any military mission that may confront us, but it gives me a way to contribute to the future of the nation. I can help bring these young men and women up right. And if I do that, and if they retain it, and they go home, we're going to be better off as a nation. And that's kind of what I had on my mind up until 1984. So it was 64 to 84 in uniform. And I said, okay, one of the last combat assignments I had was Beirut, 82, 83. And at that point, I was a captain. I had converted my commission. And that was a rotten deal. I mean, we were put in a position the Marines over there, along with the French troops and the Italian troops. We were put in a position where we were just targets, walking around with targets on our back. And because there was a diplomatic element to the mission in Beirut, we weren't allowed to do the things that every infantryman knows to do: control your own perimeter, patrol outside your perimeter, take the high ground, not the low ground. And there we sat at Beirut International Airport. And the diplomats didn't want us to keep our weapons loaded or anything like that because we would appear to be too much of a threat. So I left there in about May or June of 1983, and that October, the bombing happened. Well, at that point, most of those people that were killed, of the 241 killed, I knew a bunch of them who were friends. You get that way after a long time in any service, the Army, the Marine Corps. You get to know these people. And a lot of them died. And it sort of broke my soldier's heart. I remembered the day that I became commissioned the day that they commissioned me at Quantico, Virginia. I remembered on that morning, I gotten up to get my uniform squared away and shaved because I was no longer going to be an NCO, I was going to be an officer. And I remember looking in my eyes while I was shaving in the mirror. And I said, okay, Di, this is getting serious. You got to make a commitment here. So I'm promising, when the day comes that I can't look my young Marines in their beady ass eyeballs and say to them, follow me, it is necessary that we die. When that day comes, it's time to quit. And I said, okay. And then I kind of forgot about that. I forgot about that day until Beirut. And then I looked and I said, why did those kids die? We could have prevented that. We could have done something about that. We knew better. All our complaints and our bitching and our screaming about the situation we were in had been ignored. So I really became kind of disillusioned at that point. 20 years in, and I'm disillusioned. And I remembered that day in Quantico, and I said, okay, it's time to hang it up. It's time to quit. And that brings us sort of full circle to those days when I was trying to decide what the hell I'm going to do with myself.
Hey everybody, I want to take a quick second to thank my friends at Phantom Products for believing in Make the Donuts, sponsoring this first season. They're powering us, and on top of that, they've powered some amazing lighting applications. Since 1943, they've been providing lighting to the military. They used to light the shipping lanes for military transports during World War II. They provided lights to the New York Police Department, the New York Fire Department, and first responders all over this country. They're family-owned, they're American-made. When I was in Afghanistan and Iraq, I was using this Phantom TLS, and it's an awesome light. It's got covert, secure white, it's got cyan, it's got infrared, it's got these built-in flash patterns if you need it. In a roundabout way, without this light, there's some people in this world that probably wouldn't be here. So I want to thank Phantom Products again for believing in the show, for sponsoring us, and for the great stuff you guys make. Check out the website. We'll drop it down in the show notes. And again, Phantom Products, thanks for helping us make the donuts. A lot of people who have served in Iraq and Afghanistan look at the Vietnam generation as heroes. We were raised on the films that told your stories. You were the people that we wanted to be like. For whatever reason, we're the group of Americans that came up thinking we wanted to emulate what you did. We wanted to serve our country. Patriotism was not a dirty word. A whole generation of kids came up, and only a portion of them, now that the draft's over, served. But I know that I feel a great sense of loss. What do you tell veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan? What do you tell those vets that can help them with what they're going through right now? Because we feel like, what was our war for?
Yeah. No, I get it. And I've had the opportunity to talk to a bunch of those folks. And I say, look, you have to remember a couple of things. First of all, our war was 10 years. Yours is 20. There were times in your experience in Afghanistan or Iraq when you said, what the hell is this all about? What am I doing? How come I got to go outside the wire again? How come I got to face IEDs and that sort of thing? The how come is because the nation needs you to do that. The how come is because we have to show the world that America is willing to lead the way. We may get bloodied, we may get hurt, we may get our butts stomped in the dirt, but we're there. We're going to lead the way. And there's no way to demonstrate that, really. And it's an important element. There's no way to demonstrate that, really, unless you strap on your pack and pick up your rifle and go out there and demonstrate it. Look, you're going to long and loud the whole time you're deployed. I get that. So did I. But in the end, if you look at it in context, you did something that this nation needed, and that makes you a patriot. That makes you worthy of your citizenship. You did it. You picked it up and got it done. Now, it's a dirty job. It's often thankless. And certainly in your case, Iraq veteran, Afghanistan veteran, it seems thankless. And that's because Americans have a relatively short attention span. We tend to look at something right now, and if it doesn't provide instant feedback on it, we just shove it away. Well, you're the kind of on it. You spent 20 years off and on deploying again and again and again and again. People lost interest. They really did. Now, in the long run, and this is what's important, in the long run, they're going to rekindle that interest because they'll realize the sacrifice that you made. You must never think about it as doing it for praise or doing it, certainly you sure aren't doing it for money. That's not important. You have to be selfless. Now, you made your first selfless move when you went down and volunteered to serve in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marine Corps. That's the first selfless move. The second selfless move was when you got deployed. So you must look at that, not in terms of reward. The reward is really internal. You're never going to get rich, and you know that. You're not going to get some special fancy job just because you deployed, you know that. So the reward has to come from inside. It has to be your ability to look yourself in your beady eyeballs in the morning when you're shaving, if anybody still does that. You have to look in your own eyes and say, I did it. I did what this nation needed me to do. That's sufficient reward.
It's a good reminder. You look at what's happened, and you say to yourself, "We want to win wars. We, as the American military, we can win wars. We can defeat our enemy, and we can do it decisively." And when you see your country pulling out of a foreign land that you've clearly won over, that you've clearly militarily defeated the enemy.
Yeah, what goes around comes around. I mean, we did that in 1975. We pulled out on the South Vietnamese. You guys pulled out on the Afghans. But those are all political moves. And in no way should it diminish the service and sacrifice that you made. That's a hard thing to sell. When you sit there and you're crying the poor ass and feeling sorry for yourself and say, look, what was all that about? I spent 5 deployments into Iraq and Afghanistan, and here we are pulling out of it. No, don't look at it that way. That's not really your responsibility. It's a cry of shame, and it's a black mark on the country, but it's no black mark on you and what you did. And you've got to feed that. You've got to feed off that. That has to be in your heart and say, yeah, well, okay. Those striped trouser, foggy bottom gave up on it, but I didn't. That's worthy. That's what you hold on to.
One of the best things, in addition to having a sense of purpose, in the military was getting to know people that you don't normally interact with, maybe in your hometown. I grew up in a little place in the mountains of Virginia. There wasn't a lot of diversity, if you want to call it that, where I was. But when I got in the service, suddenly I was thrown in with these guys from all over the country, and I started realizing that, hey, these are people just like me. Politically, in particular, it was very difficult to have bad feelings about somebody who disagreed with you when you're sharing a foxhole with them or
Sure.
a cockpit. I think that's missing in America.
It is, Sabby, and I'll tell you what, it makes a hell of an argument for a return to the draft, in my view. That business of the obligation to serve, and across the board, if you're a citizen, you're going to serve. Look, it works. It's uncomfortable. It interrupts your life between the ages of 18 and 25. Sure, it interrupts it for 2 years. Give me a break. And the neat thing about it is, it irons out all of our differences. As you said, here I am living in a barracks with a guy, and I'm from Virginia, and he's from the streets of Chicago. He's black, I'm white. Here's a guy from Corpus Christi, Texas, who's brown. I never met these guys. I don't know what the hell they think. And what they think probably isn't anything like what I think. But you get to know each other. And more importantly, you get to trust each other. And more importantly, you get to rely on each other. And that takes a big broom to all the crap that you've been brought up to believe. And suddenly, you say, hey, that guy's cool. This guy's cool. There's no reason for me to hate them or them to hate me. When you get to that point, you've really made a repair in the social blanket that is America, is American society. And I think if there were some way to get back to that, we'd be lucky. We'd be fortunate. I don't know that it'll ever happen, because it's been away too long, and we've lost view of the value of it. It surfaces every once in a while in legislation and bring back the draft, and there's hue and cry across the country. I'm about to think that hue and cry ought to be ignored, and we bring this back and we say, listen, pal, it's the cost of citizenship. You don't like it, go someplace else. But 9 times out of 10, wherever you choose to go is going to make you serve anyway, and that's part of their citizenship requirement. So I think we've failed in that regard with the all-volunteer force.
I think so too, sir. And I think to your point, people will argue the professionalism of an all-volunteer military. What's a greater threat to our country? Having some conscripts for a few years who are in MOSs that aren't as critical, but making them all hang out together, or having a country completely divided politically to the point where we're starting to shoot people for what they say.
Yeah, yeah, and that certainly comes to the fore when we're in a situation like this. I mean, people whine and cry, especially in the wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination, and then in the wake of several other assassinations that have preceded it. People are crying about divisiveness. Look, pal, the biggest solution to divisiveness, the biggest aid to inclusion, is simply common military service, common service to the nation. Now, if military service upsets your apple cart, there can be national service. You could be drafted for 2 years to work in a hospital, or to work in some food program, some program for the homeless, that sort of thing. The point is that you're paying your dues as a citizen. You're contributing rather than sitting back and sucking off the system. So if there's ever been a time when we should be talking about this business of solving divisiveness and solving exclusion. The solution to exclusion is inclusion. And so you bring these people in and you get them together, and they're diverse, so you've solved that problem. And you lead them somewhere. You teach them something. You make them contribute. Sure, you're going to whine and cry and, I'm uncomfortable. Well, that's on you. The point is you're paying your dues as a citizen. And I think that would go, I think the generation of young Americans that I deal with now would swallow it. They'd swallow it hook, line, and sinker.
I think so. And you can see it in the work you've done. We have a mutual friend, Susan Watkins. She's been a great mentor to me, just like you and Julia have been. And every year I see a post with Charlie Sheen, you, Johnny Depp, all of y'all getting together decades after Platoon was filmed. The same thing with the Band of Brothers cast. All these great actors, they all get together. Maybe that's a, like a,
There's
I don't
a
know,
lesson there.
example,
Yeah.
of what military service or putting people together and getting Captain Dale Dye to yell at you will do for you. Hey, we may not be alike, but we all hate the same things.
Yeah, and that's the common denominator. Look, that lesson has not been lost on me. I mean, I believed it when I was in uniform. I wasn't sure whether that sort of thing would apply, cross apply, when I started dealing with pampered actors and all that sort of thing. It does. It does. And to this day, the people who worked on Band of Brothers are indeed a band of brothers. The people who worked on Pacific, a band of brothers. And so the business of bringing them together and leading them and giving them a common purpose and giving them a common experience is fruitful. It really is. And I can't tell you, I was thinking about it, talking to Julia about it the other day. I get calls at 2:00 in the morning, and it'll be some actor that I've trained for one role or another. And he says, my girlfriend's about to leave me. So wait a minute. And he's 22 or something like that. But he calls his captain.
Right.
And he wants his captain's advice on what to do about these things. Of course, I don't have any relevant advice. But he just wants to talk to somebody. He wants to talk to somebody in authority. And if you provide that, it's part of that glue, that cement that keeps a unit together. It's part of that inclusion, if you will.
I sometimes think to myself, if great Hollywood actors and directors and writers, people like Tom Cruise or Tom Hanks or any number of these folks would have been great military leaders had the opportunity been thrust upon them. There's a lot of people in Hollywood that might have surprised us had they worn the uniform, because you can see those same qualities. On that note, who are the celebrities, the folks in Hollywood that you've worked with, that you've looked at and said in the back of your mind, he would have been a great battalion commander?
Yeah, I'll tell you a few in just a minute, but let me make a general comment about that. Look, part of leadership is personality. You've got to be able to influence the kids with your example, the people you're leading with your example. So there's an element of personality involved, and many actors have that. You can't bully the troops. The troops have a +4 filter. Excuse my language, but there it is. And you know that better than anybody else. You've got to love them to lead them. And the key is being able to convince them that you love them, even in the hardest situations, even in the hardest times, even in the application of discipline for misbehavior. They've got to believe that you're doing it for a larger reason. They got to believe that you are expressing in your own way love for them, care for them. And that's very difficult. It's extremely difficult. And sometimes it takes a little acting. And there are those out there that I've trained and worked with who can do it. And they would do it all in different styles according to their personality. But the point is, they would convince those young men and women that they were doing it for the right reasons, that they were doing it because they loved them, like they cared, because they cared for them. An example would be Tom Cruise. Cruise is not overly sharp, but he's got a huge heart. And that heart shows. And when it shows, it attracts people, it attracts attention. So he would make one. Tom Hanks, an extraordinary ability to influence people. And he has a technical bent. The guy, don't give the guy an alarm clock because he'll take it apart and not figure out how to get it back together. So he's got a technical bent. He would have been a great motor pool sergeant, that sort of thing. Gary Sinise, brilliant young leader. He's not in the business much anymore, but he's still out there helping veterans. He would be great. Tommy Lee Jones, one of the prickliest characters you're ever going to hang around with. He reminds you of the old first sergeant, the stereotypical first sergeant, the company gunny. But he's got that ability to influence you. I loved Cuba Gooding, who's got he's got energy, and that energy just exudes. It just comes off of him, and he would be a good influencer. There's been a number of them. Take probably at least a third of the big role actors in Band of Brothers, and they all would have been terrific. The point is, they're out there, and I've trained them, and I've stripped away all the nonsense and seen if there's a heart in there, and if there's a brain in there. And if there is, they can be leaders.
Amazing. What are the things you look for when you're training an actor that you want to develop, as far as or change even? When you give an example, if you can, of a situation with an actor. You don't have to name a name, but just a transformation process, something that you saw that was unique, that was a challenge that they accepted, or something cool.
Well, look, I think in my method, you have to take those actors and reduce them to the lowest common denominator. You have to make them all the same to start with, level the playing field. And that's uncomfortable. That's difficult because Captain Dye does it primarily with physical training. And you haven't been asked to do this since high school gym, but you're going to do it now. And you're going to do it until Captain Dye is tired, which is never. So you're going to continue to do this sort of thing. Once you've reached that level, then you start seeing what emerges. Then you start seeing the personalities. I remember, for instance, when we were training for Saving Private Ryan. I won't tell you who this was, but there were few enough actors in Saving Private Ryan for you to probably figure it out. The British, we were training in the hinterlands outside Hatfield, northwest of London. The weather got miserable. It rained and it was cold. He was saying to himself, look, it's called acting. Why do I need this? Why do I need to be in touch with any of this kind of crap? I'll just act it. And so I had a little talk with him one evening at Stand Down. I said, you're gonna act it, right? Oh yeah, I can do that. I can act it. I've seen enough war movies. I know how to. I said, okay. Show me tired. No, show me tired. Then he began to put his finger on what he'd been that day, which is terribly tired. And it was nothing like the cliche. I said, all right, show me pissed off. No. Remember when you didn't get the chow that you wanted? Remember that? Yeah. That's pissed off. And you can pull out these emotions. And they're real emotions. They're prompted by real situations. And if you can convince them that those are so much more interesting, so much more real, so much more applicable, so much more understandable by audiences who've felt that way, then you're not acting. You're telling the truth. And it took a while to get to that level. But every time he'd slip, I'd say, wait a minute, think about this. How you feeling right now? I'm really okay. Yeah, that's really because you're there. Now think about it.
That's
It's
great.
it's that sort of thing, and it's about hitting walls. I mean, those of us who served in the military know about those walls. You get out there and crash into that full speed, and you think, I'll never get over this. I'll never get through this wall. I'll never get through this. I'll never be able to climb over that fence. Yeah, you will. Yeah, you will. And the guys who are with you will help you. They'll influence you in one way or the other. They might not reach and grab your butt and throw you over the wall, but they'll influence you to go there. And that's a huge lesson. Um, and some people are better at it than others. And those who are better at it generally are good leaders.
Let me ask you this then. If a young veteran wants to follow in your footsteps, they want to
Don't,
work in Hollywood.
don't.
Don't do it. If they won't listen to you, which they sometimes wouldn't, what would you tell them then?
Look, you got to chase your dream. The biggest drawback for getting into showbiz is you don't have a big background for it. That's what showbiz thinks. And there is still, to this day, a thing I call Hollywood hubris. And what that is a feeling that nobody who spent any time in uniform could possibly have a creative bone in his body. Or why the hell would he why would he be in uniform? Why isn't he making movies or writing books? That's so false and so untrue. But it's a barrier you're going to have to run into, and you're going to have to run into it head first half the time. And there's a lot of money involved. There's a whole pot full of money involved. And people don't necessarily want to share that money. So you've got to be somewhat diplomatic. You can't do what I did. You can't go in there and grab them by the stacking swivel and say, listen up, you turd. You're making war movies in the wrong way, and I'm going to fix it. No, that won't work. There's too many delicate egos out there, and you've got to deal with that. I would urge you, if you really want to do this sort of thing, get a job on a movie set. I mean, I did. I did a little film called Invaders from Mars, which is the first one I ever worked on. Toby Hooper was the director. Unfortunately, he was a great guy. And the storyboard artist was a guy I'd been in Vietnam with. And I went to film school. I mean, I did every job that was available. And I talked to people. I said, what are you doing? How do you do this? What's it about? And be surprised how many people were willing to share. I hate that word, but are willing to teach you. Really willing to explain what they're doing. And if you can go to film school on a a production assistant on a job, anything that does take a lot of skill, what happens is you are able to focus your attention. You're able to say, okay, well, this is what I want to do. I want to be a gaffer and worry about lighting and filters and gels and that sort of thing. Or I want to be a cinematographer. I want to be that guy behind that camera over there because I think I have that kind of eye. Or I want to be an actor. And then you start studying what they're doing and how they're doing it. And it allows you to sort of refine your interest. What do you really want to do? If you want to be a military advisor, and there are people who've tried that, who've tried to do what I do, and some of them have been successful, not many. And the reason is military movies come along every once in a while. They're sort of in a sine curve. there'll be a batch of them at one point and then nothing for 6 years. So what do you do during those 6 years when there's no military movies out there that you can pitch and try to get? Well, that's where you've got to be smart. That's where you got to sort of expand what you're doing. That's where I got into video games. That's where I got into themed entertainment. You got to be able to find a way to use that skill and that talent and that motivation that you have to open up military life and share it with people. You got to be able to do that in any way that's available. Start writing books. I mean, Sabiston and I know about that. We've written a few. So keep scratching the creative itch, I think is probably the bottom line.
Okay. One last question, sir, and I appreciate your time. You look back on this career, decades and decades. What's your favorite memory on set?
Well, look, I guess my favorite memories are when something comes together. And I know it's not finished yet, but I can see this outfit coming together. The Great Raid is an example. Band of Brothers is an example. There have been a number of them, but the point is, there was a time in making that film, in making that production, when I saw it gel, when I saw that unit that I had trained able to do things without instruction, able to just go out there and I'd say, all right, I want 2 squads over here, base of fire, hook left, boom. They just do it because they know how to do it. And it's moments like that. And there's been so many of them, and it's hard for me to pick one out. But it's moments when the unit just gels, just comes together, and it's sort of the proof of my pudding, if you will, that this works, and it works to everybody's betterment.
Well, you've done more than make films believable. You've done more than tell military stories. You've helped bridge the gap that's still wide, it's still big, but you've done that. If nothing else, you should know that in the eyes of millions of us, you have made civilians understand what the military is like and what it isn't like, maybe even more importantly. That's something you've done. But you can't retire yet. You still got one more movie I need you to do at some point. But it's been a real honor. It's been an honor to get to know you and to have you tell me right from wrong over the last several years and get to know you and Julia. You guys are both amazing. You've done great work. You're good people. And you're really cool because you came on my show.
Thank you, Savvy.
Listen, if you want to learn more about Captain Dale Dye, it's called Google. It's everywhere. But I really recommend Checkpoint Delta, his blog that he talks about stuff on there. It's not just Hollywood stuff. It's current events and politics. That's my favorite thing that he's done. Obviously, the Shake Davis series, which needs to be a movie at some point. But thanks for being on Make the Donuts, Captain Dye. We really appreciate everything you've done. And thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you on the next episode.